Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Good to be back.
So today we're jumping into something pretty unusual happening right at the top of the Defense Department.
Yeah, this Politico piece really lays out a fascinating, maybe even slightly troubling situation.
It really does. We're focusing on Tim Parlatore. He's not just a personal lawyer, but also a top advisor for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Okay, so high-level access there.
Exactly. But here's the twist. He's simultaneously representing clients who are actively suing the government.
Wow. Okay, suing the government while advising the secretary.
That's right. It immediately makes you think about potential conflicts of interest.
Absolutely. And what that means for, say, the military justice system's perception of fairness.
For sure. I mean, consider this. He's involved in lawsuits against the Navy while being a key advisor to the guy the Secretary of the Navy reports to.
That's a close loop.
And then there's the Admiral Burke case we need to talk about. He's defending this retired four-star admiral against federal corruption charges.
And in that case,
well, Parlatore will likely be cross-examining Navy officials, people who definitely know about his connection to Secretary Hegseth.
right, which could create a very awkward dynamic in court, couldn't it?
You'd think so. So let's unpack what makes this whole situation so noteworthy.
So the core of it is these dual roles, right? Parlatore is deeply embedded.
Yeah, the Politico reporting really details it. Personal lawyer, key advisor to Hegseth.
And then the private practice, suing the Navy, defending clients against the government.
And don't forget, he just recently got recommissioned into the Navy Reserve back in March. Specifically, it seems, to help Hegseth.
Right. That adds another layer. It's not just an informal advisory role. It's now got this formal military connection, too.
It really shows a deep level of integration. He's not just some outside consultant popping in occasionally.
No, definitely not. And it goes beyond just policy advice, apparently. He's reportedly coordinating a leak investigation inside the Pentagon.
Yeah, that's in there. A pretty sensitive task.
And there was that mention of him being in a signal group with Hegseth's wife and brother.
Right, where the defense secretary apparently shared details about a strike on Yemen.
That seems like a significant blurring of lines between personal ties, official information, and, well, his advisory role.
It does. And then you look at the court records, he's listed as the attorney on, 11 cases?
11, yeah. Many involving retired military personnel.
So it's not just one or two cases, it's a pattern.
And that volume, combined with the advisory position, that's where these questions about potential advantage really start to surface, isn't it?
Exactly. Which leads us to the concerns being raised by legal experts.
Yeah, it's not surprising they're weighing in. You have people like Joshua Kastenberg, a former Air Force lawyer.
Right. He called it a great advertising possibility.
Which, suggests using the government connection for private gain. He also said it doesn't quite pass the smell test.
Pretty blunt.
Yeah.
And Eugene Fidel, who's a big name in military law.
His take was simpler. It doesn't look good.
Sometimes that says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It just highlights the ethical questions hanging over this.
Definitely. The core concern seems to be this potential leveraging of his government ties, his closeness to Hegseth being seen in the secretary's office.
Could that give him an advantage, or at least be seen as giving him an advantage when he's representing service members?
That's the worry. Someone quoted in the article who worked with him at the Pentagon basically said, Parlatore's business is representing people in the military justice system.
So that access to the very top, potentially very valuable for his practice.
It raises serious questions about fairness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How does it look to others in that system?
Interestingly, though, if you look at Parlatore's own website, there's no mention of his work for Hegseth.
No Navy Reserve status mentioned either.
Nope. He defends himself by saying he sells legal skill, not political pull.
Okay.
And he argues that the conflict of interest rules work differently for reservists compared to, say, full-time government employees. He even says he turns clients away if they seem to be trying to hire him for his connections.
So his position is, I know the rules, I follow them, and I'm selling expertise, not access.
That seems to be the gist of it. But it really highlights the gap between his view and how others, especially ethics experts, are perceiving it.
And that brings up the classic distinction, right, between an actual conflict of interest and the appearance of one. Even if he genuinely believes he's operating completely ethically and within the specific rules for reservists, the optics, well, they're challenging.
Yeah, a top advisor to a cabinet secretary suing the government.
Yeah.
It's just not something you see every day.
And the fact that the Pentagon hasn't commented.
Just says no comment. which, doesn't exactly clear things up. It kind of lets those concerns linger.
Right, leaves a vacuum.
No.
Okay, so let's pivot to that specific case, Admiral Robert Burke.
Yes, this is a big one. Parlatore is lead defense counsel. Burke, a retired four-star admiral, is facing serious federal corruption charges.
And the charges involve.
Allegations that Burke steered a lucrative Navy contract to a company in exchange for a high-paying job after he retired.
Okay, serious stuff. So how does Parlatore's dual role potentially complicate this trial?
Well, like we touched on, he's almost certainly going to be cross-examining high-ranking Navy witnesses.
Witnesses who know exactly who he is and who he advises at the Pentagon.
Precisely. You have to wonder if that knowledge might, consciously or unconsciously, affect how they testify.
That's a subtle but potentially powerful dynamic, isn't it? That awareness of his connection to their ultimate boss, Secretary Hegseth.
And the timing here is interesting, too. The article points out Parlatore signed Burke up before the election, before Hegseth was secretary, before this whole advisory role really took shape.
Oh, okay. So the representation started before the potential conflict fully materialized.
Right, but his new dual role, as Politico puts it, developed after he took the case. So the situation evolved while he was already representing Burke.
Which might explain why it became an issue later on. Did the prosecution raise it?
They did. During a court hearing, a prosecutor specifically flagged Parlatore's Defense Department work as a potential conflict.
And what did they want the judge to do?
Basically, to make sure Admiral Burke understood the situation fully, that his lawyer was working both for him and closely with the Defense Secretary, given the case involved Navy personnel and alleged misconduct within the Navy.
So ensuring informed consent from the client, essentially.
Yeah, but Parlatore pushed back.
How so?
He told the judge he didn't see a conflict. He argued lots of lawyers serve in the reserves, and he even mentioned he'd cross-examined higher-ranking officers before as a reservist with that issue.
Okay, drawing on past experience, and what did Admiral Burke say?
Burke told the judge he had no concerns.
So the client explicitly waived any potential conflict, at least verbally in court.
Yes. And the judge, Trevor McFadden, initially seemed satisfied. He said he didn't see a conflict at that point and that Burke understood.
But there's usually a but.
Well, the article makes a key observation. During that whole exchange, Parlatore's specific role as a top advisor to Hegseth, his longstanding personal lawyer, wasn't actually mentioned.
Ah, so the judge's assessment might have been based on incomplete information about the extent of the Pentagon role.
That's the implication. It wasn't just a reservist doing some work. It was this very close advisory position.
That context feels pretty important. Okay, so stepping back from the Burke case, what are the wider implications people are worried about?
Well, groups like the Revolving Door Project are looking at the adversarial system itself.
They're concerned being...
How does it function when one side's attorney has this kind of potential influence within the government structure they're up against? What are the government lawyers thinking?
That's a fair question. And then there's Kathleen Clark, the legal ethics professor. Her point was interesting.
Yeah, she framed the glaring conflict of interest as being more for the government than for Parlatore's client.
Explain that a bit more.
Her concern is about those government witnesses again, the worry that they might be influenced, maybe shading their testimony, because of Parlatore's connections high up in the DoD.
So the potential impact isn't just on Parlatore's client, but on the integrity of the government's own case and processes.
Exactly. It broadens the scope of the ethical questions.
And internally at the Pentagon, was this arrangement smooth sailing?
Apparently not entirely. The reporting suggests Parlatore's recommissioning, his frequent presence there may be more than typical for a reservist, and the fact he initially didn't have top secret clearance. All that apparently caused some unease. Even the acting general counsel, Charlie Young, was reportedly uncomfortable with the setup.
So not everyone inside was convinced it was totally above board or standard
It
practice.
seems that way. It suggests internal friction, or at least questions about it.
And we should probably mention, Parlatore is no stranger to high-profile politically charged cases.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
He represented former President Trump in the Mar-a-Lago documents case and the January 6th investigation work.
And he was involved in the Eddie Gallagher court-martial too, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right. So he has experience operating in these complex, high-stakes environments where law and politics often intersect.
And his current role connects him to other Hegseth controversies too, right? Like those leak investigations.
Yeah, leaks about potential Panama Canal plans, Elon Musk's visit to the Pentagon. Parlatore was apparently involved in looking into those.
There was even talk, according to the article, of having Parlatore conduct a major review of the Pentagon's entire investigative process.
Which just underscores the level of trust and influence he seems to have within Hegseth's circle. It's not just advising on specific legal matters.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We have this really unique situation. A close personal attorney, also a top advisor to the Defense Secretary.
Who is simultaneously running a private practice where he's suing parts of the government, like the Navy, and defending individuals like Admiral Burke against federal charges.
It inevitably raises these significant ethical questions, both real and perceived conflicts of interest.
And practical questions, too, about fairness within the legal system, especially the military justice system.
Right.
The specifics we discussed, the Burke defense, the lawsuits against the Navy, they really throw this unusual dynamic into sharp relief. Absolutely. It's not a standard setup by any means.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with something to chew on, I think. What does an arrangement like this really tell us about the intersection of political power, private legal work, and how government institutions function?
Yeah, and maybe more importantly, how might this kind of dual role affect trust? Not just the reality, but the perception of justice and fairness, both inside the military and for the public looking in.
It definitely makes you think about where those lines should be drawn, doesn't it? Especially when you have such close ties at the very highest levels. Something to consider.